So I didn't see The Great Discovery until I was like 20. Throughout the early 2000s into the 2010s, I owned, and still do, a lot of Thomas Home Media releases from the hit era. From season 8 to 9 VHS tapes to CGI series DVDs, seeing how I grew up in this time period, it was most often I would pop in any of these to watch sometimes. One set of home media releases were DVDs of season 12, and on these DVDs were trailers of Thomas's newest movie at the time, The Great Discovery. I'm gonna be honest, when I first brought these DVDs, the Great Discovery trailers really interested me, as it would briefly mention the plot of it and show clips and shots of the newest character Stanley, and mention a celebrity guest star as the role of the narrator. And then I would get really intrigued when it showed the clip of Thomas dangling on the loose bridge as it was collapsing, as the trailer described the moment as Thomas setting off on a dangerous mission. As I witnessed all this, I thought, oh my damn, this movie sounds epic as hell, and told myself that I'd have to go buy it someday if it was still in the stores, which unfortunately I never saw it on shelves when I went out and brought the season 12 releases, so I never got to see it. Soon Hero of the Rails in season 13 came out, and I soon forgot about The Great Discovery. Even as years went by and I kept watching the show, I always knew that The Great Discovery existed, but seeing how I was intrigued with the new changes of the show at the time, I never was interested in it. Fast forward to 2021 or so, and I finally had a thought one day. Out of the many seasons and movies of the Thomas franchise that I've seen, I have not once seen The Great Discovery yet. Luckily, it was up on YouTube and I watched it. And my first thoughts on it was, it's okay. I mean, it had been many years since I last saw a season 12 DVD, and I was, and still am, obviously well grown out of my hit era phase. So naturally, I didn't have the same thoughts on it as I probably would have if I first saw it back in the day. From my first viewing, I could see why a lot of people and fans were excited for this movie, because the movie did indeed have some action moments featured, like I said, the collapsing bridge scene, Thomas coming across the abandoned Great Waterton, the scene of Stanley's cars destroying the tower, causing it to crash to the ground, the whole entire sequence of Thomas rushing through the mine and splashing down a river, etc. While I did think some of these action scenes looked pretty cool, although the mine scene with Thomas did look pretty over the top and cheesy, I was mostly paying attention to the style and tone of the writing. And, well, yes, some parts in this movie are obviously still pretty cringe writing from Miller herself, and I was kind of frowning at the rhyming bits and preschool-like feel of some of the scenes, like the scene of Percy and Stanley playing in the bubbles at the washdown, like for, say, toddlers in a bathtub, or the mention of hide and seek in the Thomas is Missing song, like as if Thomas really ran away to play hide and seek while feeling guilty about the whole mess he had caused. Or the scene where Thomas rolls over, in a very toyish look by the way, and Sir Topham Hatt is crossed by saying, "Thomas needs to go to the works," and boom, Thomas is immediately fixed when he comes out, like, what? And they say no one was hurt when that roll obviously looked like it had to hurt Thomas, and not to mention his crew would be, like, dead. And to be honest, I am totally convinced that the writers just came up to the spirit of Dr. Seuss and whatever, and asked him to ghostwrite some of the lines for the scene where the news is spread about Thomas being found. I mean, I know there's rhyming everywhere later on in the show too. I'm looking at you, Misty Island Rescue.
I make good decisions, that's what I was told. I will.
But this hits different because it was a funny kind of rhyming instead of an annoying kind like in the CGI series. So yeah, the movie still does have the uncomfortable hit era marks and vibes and all, but I also like some good things about it too. I like Thomas's guilt about disrupting the restoration project because of his cheeky idea, causing him to feel like an outcast when everyone turns on him. It feels kind of close to his old persona of being cheeky and then feeling regretful once he makes a silly mistake as a result of it. I won't lie though, the scene of everyone being mad at him for knocking down the tower did feel Calling All Engines-esque for a second, like when he knocked down the water tower on the runway. But here at least it's different because he wrongfully caused someone else to do it out of petty jealousy and not directly causing it from clumsiness. I also liked how he began to miss being with his friends towards the end as he was separated from them when he went missing. And all because he wanted to make it up to them and get back in their good graces after what he's done. I'm gonna talk more on that in a minute though. I kind of feel bad for him when he began to feel lonely. Another thing I admired was when Thomas didn't want to tell Sir Topham Hatt about his doings, and the other engines, especially James, just straight up admit the truth on him about his jealousy, with Stanley causing everyone to feel some type of way with him. The ending to the movie was pretty cool to me too, as it did feel like a nice, sweet little ensemble with everyone to celebrate all the hard work put into restoring the town. Plus, Thomas saying, "We're all leaders of the track," was pretty cute, though little did I know that was the movie's original title. So in the end, I thought it was a pretty okay movie at the time. Now, all of this was really my opinions and thoughts during my first watch, but I just rewatched The Great Discovery for the sake of this script, and there are more things I found that I actually like from it. The negative thoughts, however, haven't really changed much, sadly. First off, I like the whole situation between Thomas and Stanley. When I first saw this, I thought the whole Thomas gets jealous of a new engine thing was silly at first, because being jealous of someone was just a trope that they could not keep away from in the hit eras. But after someone pointed out that Thomas's jealousy is understandable because it corresponds to his character of having a big ego and being upset when it gets squashed, I can kind of see it. Thomas being jealous of Stanley plays really well into his cocky, big-headed personality, and seeing his asshole side come out when he feels inferior to being upstaged by another engine, specifically another tank engine. Not only that, but also when he wanted himself as well as his friends to work harder so that he could prove himself better than Stanley, and feels worse when his big role of being in charge of the restoration project is taken from him. Again, it kind of takes you back to previous examples of this egotistical behavior with his character, such as in the first 2 seasons when he thought no engine worked as hard as him and he thought he was the best on the railway. I'm looking at examples like when he got jealous of Duck in The Runaway, or all of his run-ins with Percy and the big engines in stories like Woolly Bear or Better Late Than Never. It all finally comes crashing down on him, though, when he does something cheeky as a result of all this selfish pettiness, and he is rightfully blamed. Here's where I come back to where I said about him wanting to make things right with everyone, because him wanting to own up to his wrongdoings is like an example of his growing phase in the later classic seasons. You would think Thomas would just apologize to everyone, and in the next scene they all happily work together and the job is finished and yada yada. But no, his goal was to aid his friends and finish their hard shunting job for them as a peace treaty. Yeah, the old Thomas came out of him for a bit with that jealousy part, but on the doing a favor for his friends as an apology part is where his later mature side kicks in. Kinda subtle when you think about it, huh? I want to now talk about the end part, with Stanley finding Thomas. Also, another thing I appreciated on this rewatch was Stanley's character. He's your usual friendly chap when he first arrives and immediately makes a good impression with everyone, which I like. But I want to talk about his character at the end for a second. I really love the selfless and determined effort he put into still trying to find Thomas, even though he and the others have looked all over the island. Like how he went up as far as the hills or whatever as a last search for him before the searching gave up. And doing this is pretty generous if you ask me. Last time Stanley noticed, Thomas despised him, and he literally caused him to have a crash accident because he despised him. So at the tail end of the search, while everyone else is tired and on the brink of giving up, Stanley pushes on and decides to look around one more time despite Thomas hating him, because he knows how important Thomas is to everyone and the whole project. So that, and the fact that Stanley still likes and forgives Thomas so quickly once he finds and rescues him, is really sweet when you think about it. It makes him not only more likable, but more compassionate too. I found the apology Thomas makes cute too, because it shows how grateful he became after the one engine he hated this whole time still came to help him after all that went down. Really nice moment. One more thing I liked is Pierce Brosnan's narration. This guy sounds so soft. Like his speaking tone is so calming and not too overbearing when he narrates.
Come on, Monty and Max. Let's make Stanley proud, Jack cried. There are many jobs to be done, Sir Topham Hatt added. All the engines were pleased.
I like how he tells the story in a hushed whisper, like as if he was telling a bedtime story to children, which he did himself admit that's how he wanted to tell it due to him having kids of his own. Even the moments where his voice shouts and gets loud during action scenes are whispered yells.
He flew across a ravine and hit the ground with a bump. Thomas slid down a hill. Trees and rocks were everywhere.
I'll agree with others when they say his voice is a blessing to hear as a break from the two Michaels narrations. Hearing his voice again is just so refreshing. If only he stayed on the show a little longer after this movie. I won't lie, The Great Discovery was a pretty strange movie to me at first for someone who wanted to see it for some time. But in the end, in my opinion, it's a pretty decent movie for its good parts and despite its questionable parts. From the usual hit era shticks to its subtle but familiar qualities it revives to Thomas's character, to the intriguing conflict and nice sweet resolution between the two mains, it is, most certainly to me, quite the interesting and enjoyable film. Definitely worth the watch for anyone.